All right, we're gonna start on the first step. Well, there's a lot of like organizing type things that you can do according to the manual. This is the first assembly step. So what it has you do is build the y-axis rails. Uh, so they're not even really complaints. They're just very minor issues so far. One of them is that you do have like, I don't know, 10 to 15 aluminum extrusions, and they all have little subtle differences. And so you do probably need to go through, if you're on, at least with the Formbot kit, and sort out which rails line up with which letter numbers in the manual. Like these are, I believe, E rails, and so they have one access hole. Oh, where's it at? Right there, and no others on it. And there are other rails of this same length that maybe have two holes on the end, or no holes, or holes on multiple sides, or whatever. So you do have to sort through those. It would be slightly more handy if they had a sticker that said these matched up with the E rails. It's not a huge deal at all, though. And it's pretty easy to find them. There aren't that many different rails to try and sort through, and these are pretty easy to find. So there's 4 of these, and I need 2 of them to build the y-axis. I've already built this y-axis, and I thought I'd go through what you do to assemble one of these others. So these are little nut carrier printed parts. I suppose these really wouldn't have to be ABS in the end, but I did print them in ABS also. The files call for printing 5 of them. I'll need just the 2. There's one already in here and this one. What you do is you populate them with M2 nuts. The Formbot kit comes with pretty much all the hardware labeled, so that's handy. And they're super tiny, M2s are, so you do have to deal with that. There are holes enough to put one in every one of these. I don't know if I have the hardware for that though, so I'm going with the every other hole option here, and I think that will be plenty fine. Particularly over this short of a span, I don't see any problems with that. But just be aware that I don't know currently if I have enough of the M2 nuts to put one in every one of these holes. So you skip 1. When you get to the end, you skip 2 so that you have one on the end here. At least for the y-axis you do. And these are really handy. This is a nice way to do this. So now I need to line this up so that the access hole is here, and it will just slide in and keep all, whoops, it will if I leave it in there. It will keep, oh, now this might be a problem. Nope, not a big problem at all. Just reach in there and get that little guy out of there. Although it's stuck on the Allen wrench now. It keeps them spaced correctly, although you gotta get them in there without popping them out. Now these are the rails, linear rails that come with the Formbot kit. They do have these little rubber stoppers. I need to put holes or screws in these holes when I'm done with it. So what I did on the one I already assembled is I moved these in one, so it still stops the carriage from sliding off the rail, so because that would be a huge problem. Now this one is still not a huge complaint. I think it will be fine, assuming the hardware works out the way I think it will. But the manual calls for button head screws to go in here, and I could not find button head screws of this size in the kit anywhere. I found socket head cap screws. So I'm going to assume that I have enough of these to also count as the button head. It doesn't matter. They are below the surface here, so they don't impede the movement at all. So I'm going to just assume that this particular kit just substituted, in this case, socket head screws, where the manual technically calls for button head cap screws. I don't think it's going to be any big deal at all. I searched through the bags, and I didn't see any that said that 2x6 button head cap screws anywhere else. I did find a random bag of 2.5 by 6, which that's a little bit weird, but I did find them. So they have you print these, which are really handy for aligning and centering the rail. I think that's a really ingenious way to do it, to get this thing lined up correctly. So I like that. So we don't need to tighten these down yet. I'm just getting them started because I have to get this rail at a certain position. So here's where you want to be careful. You don't want this thing flying off the end of one of these rails. So I'm going to take the rubber stopper here and move it inboard one hole so that it still does its job of stopping the carriage, but now I have access to that hole. And get that started, and then I need one more of these screws. All right, and it goes in the other end down here. They are super tiny, so it's a little bit of a challenge. And then the instructions say to set this guy in 38 millimeters from this end. So I've got my caliper set, and we're just going to slide it into position. Looks like one of these might be a little bit tight. There it with that one. So that I don't know, exactly how accurate these need to be, but we're going to be as close as we can to getting it to 38. And then I want it to be centered, so I'm using these guide prints to keep it centered. And when you're doing anything like this with multiple fasteners, you work your way through it. You don't just tighten everything, like tighten this one completely, then move to the next one. You gradually tighten them all, and then check for alignment everywhere. Everything still works, and then you go in and get these tightened down. These are not going to have any real amount of force on them. I did notice some of the instructions say to use a thread locker. I'm not using that on these particular ones. We will see if I end up needing that or not. I don't know that I'm going to need it. It didn't say. I'll have to check more closely to see if it said use thread locker on these particular installations, but I didn't see that. All right, so that's kind of the Y-axis assembled, and we'll move on to the next part. Okay, the next step it says is to assemble the Z rails. They are very similar, except the extrusions are going to be slightly different. Now, I did notice on this one that there are very similar extrusions. Let me see if I can find the other one that's very similar. Here's one. So this looks the same here. There are holes near both ends, so here, 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 and here. But when you rotate it, this extrusion also has a hole here. So this one I believe is what they call a B, and this one is a C. And so don't get confused on those. We need the C rail extrusions for Z. So I guess they could have named these all like X, Y, and Z, I guess, but they're A, B, C, D, E, F, and all that kind of thing. All right, the rest of this is going to assemble just like the Z, so I'm not going to bother recording that part. We'll just come back when we get to the next step. Okay, now we're building the bed carrier. We've got another super tiny issue, but one to be aware of. The manual calls for 2 what they call F extrusions and 1 G extrusion. This particular kit, they all are identical, where they have holes here and they're tapped on the ends. All 3 of these end up being the same. It's not a big deal. These holes don't need to be in the F extrusions, I believe it is, but they are, and so it's not going to be a problem, but it could be slightly confusing because you can't find the versions of these that don't have holes in them. And technically, I don't think the ends of the G need to be tapped, but I think just, in a mass production kind of setting, it's cheaper to just go ahead and make all the parts the same, and if there's no other reason not to, then just make them all the same. So I think that's what they did here. You have to have this little printed part. We will take 2 of these. I guess I will line it up so that the holes are all matching at least. And they have a different building technique here that I haven't actually seen before, but what they do is that they're going to screw a B 3x8 button head screw into here partially. So something like this. I guess I should have tested that this hole was already, you know, clean. It looks like it's not quite that clean. The threads are a little bit stiff in here. But anyway, you're gonna thread this in, not all the way, but what's going to end up happening is the extrusion rail is going to ride in there, and then they have an access hole here where you can finish tightening it up, and so you'll have this kind of blind connection in there at a right angle. So that's kind of nice. So we're going to put these in, one end of each of our bed carrier rails. This thread is much nicer than that one I just used. Something like that. We're going to attach them in here, some B or M3 by 12, and they're going to screw directly in here. Oh, before we do that, there's probably a little bit of an order of operations that we should follow, because there are also holes on the bottom where we're going to screw in from here. And it's going to be much simpler, I think, if we do that one first, even though the instructions kind of show it the other direction. I think it's going to be, I don't know, it's probably about the same either way, but we need to put this nut in here and get it all lined up. This one doesn't have a nut carrier, so I'm thinking this will be easier to do. Oh, you know what? No, we can't do that. It's not slotted. So somehow we've got to get this to match up with that nut. That's probably going to be kind of tricky. What I think I'm going to try to do is find it in there, and these particular pieces of hardware are black with the black rail, and so it's hard to see the nut down in there, but I think I got it lined up. Let's see. Yep. So that's how I'm going to handle doing that. Oh, and it looks like I ended up putting the holes facing up and down, so we'll do that on this piece also, just so they match. It's not going to matter. They aren't even supposed to be there, so that will be fine. And we'll slide this guy in here, put it more or less the right depth, and then get this guy in lined up more or less like that, and hope we hit the hole. And I think we did. Yeah. All right, so then we'll seat these so that they're up against here. So I might loosen these a little bit just to make sure that they're all the way up against there. Then we'll pull them up tight with the M3 by 12s coming in from this end, and then we'll tighten these down, and then we'll put that back piece on. So this is the little bed carrier, so it goes underneath the bed. You can kind of start to get an idea of the scale of the machine, where it's pretty tiny, but I think it's going to be a good setup. So let's pull them up tight, something like this. And then let's tighten these, because they should be in as far this direction as they can come. And then let's add this guy. Now this one, the holes do matter, because these are access holes to get to the heads of these screws. And so we do need that to line up. And then we're going to tighten those screws down to hold this in place. This is the one that was kind of stiff before. I could probably find a M3 tap, but I think this will work fine in the end. And that's our bed carrier once I get this guy to tighten up. That's it right there. So there's a little bed carrier. Okay, now we're going to work on assembling some of the Z-axis, the frame and parts of that. So a couple of little things here to be aware of. I've already started on this. We need 2 of the B extrusions. These don't have any holes in there. I've already added B 3x10 screws to each one of the ends here. Those are going to be more of those blind captured screws to hold the pieces on the sides later on. One of these is just going to have 2 of the blind screws here. You thread or you feed in some nut M3 nuts into the deal, so they will get aligned later. Right now they're just kind of floating around in there. This one, I thought I would go ahead and do that. I need the so in the ends I had M3x10, M3x6 are what these will be. So you grab your M3x6, a little M3 nut, and start the threading here, something like that, and just slide it in. Now this piece, or well, they're going to be identical up until this point. So at this point I need to also preload 2 other M3 nuts in here. Otherwise I'm going to have to do some disassembly later on, because these nuts are going to be used to hold the Z stepper motor in place later on. So kind of hard to get it in there, but I think we're getting there. There we go. So 1. And we do need to keep these separate later on. This one's going to end up at the bottom of our printer when we start to assemble things. So there's 2. And now we can do another set of the M6 screw with the M3x6, not M6, M3, but 6 millimeters long. And get that guy in there. And so now we have 2 almost identical pieces, but one has 2 preloaded nuts in it. Now what we're going to do is take our Z rails that we built earlier. Remember, we built Y and Z that look very similar, except they're slightly different spacing from the end. So the Z should be 33 millimeters, and I think these were maybe 30, I don't remember, 38 millimeters I think it was. So I need the 33 millimeter ones. And we're going to take the bottom rod here, so the one that has the preloaded nuts in it, and we are going to do this little guy. And remember, we have this access hole so that we can get in there and tighten that guy down. We will align it where it needs to be left and right later. So right now it's just going to we just want the 33 millimeter gap at the top and the shorter gap at the bottom. And so this guy is going to do this. And we are starting to build parts that kind of look like they might do something. This is going to be much important now that you have some way to stop these, because this is going to be, eventually it's going to be vertical, and you don't want these sliding off the bottom. So I've got the little rubber stoppers. You might want to masking tape them down or whatever, so that they won't slide off of there when you're handling this thing. We need to preload 3 nuts into the back here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that before we put the top on it. 3 in each of these rails. So let's feed one guy in there. The only problem is, if you're clumsy, these are super tiny and difficult to deal with, but I'm making do. So there are those 3, and we'll let them. Now, there's nothing keeping them from sliding all the way out the bottom, I don't think. Oh yeah, I don't think they'll go past the head of that screw that's down there, so maybe they won't slide all the way out. I'm not going to really try that, but I think they will at least kind of hang out where they need to go. So let's get this guy in there, and that one in there. So there's, just going to move them down a little bit, and we're going to do the same kind of thing that we did down here at the top. So we've got the 2 preloaded guys there. Probably going to be easier if we turn this over. So we can do something like this and this. And obviously this is going to have to be, you know, squared up and all of that. We're just trying to get it assembled currently, and then we'll get the spacing and everything squared up and in the right spacing, because it's not at all going to work if we don't take a you know, this thing can be all sorts of different configurations that are not what it's supposed to be. We are going to put sides on. These are called the H extrusions. They end up having access holes on either end, but only on one side. So the other side's blank, and there's access holes. And so they're going to go here on both ends, with access holes giving us a way to get into the screw there. That will also kind of help square it up a little bit. And we'll have the back of our printer beginning to take shape. And then this guy. All right, so I will come back when I've gotten this sorted out the correct way, and we can see what the next step is. Okay, a very short update. I've been trying to square up all of this frame. I think it's pretty close. We won't know until we actually mount something to here how parallel everything is. But we do have these little stoppers to add. So all they are is 3D printed piece, M3x8 screw and nut, and slide it into the rail here. Tighten it down, and that should keep the carriage on our linear rail from sliding off the bottom. So those are going to be pretty important. I do want to make sure they don't come loose, because if these, like I said, if these carriages come off the rails, then you've got a whole bunch of problems, and you probably just need new rails at that point. All right, we'll be back, and next I believe we're going to begin mounting the bed carrier itself to these carriages. Okay, now we are getting ready to mount the bed carrier. This little guy that we built earlier is going to go in here. I've already mounted one of the 3D printed parts. There's another one that looks very similar. It does have this tab coming off the edge, so it's going to be a little bit different mounting than the one that we just mounted. They have 4 screw holes that will line up with the M2 screws right here, and you just screw it on to the carriage, or the little carriage here, with M2x8 socket head screws, these little guys. And these are some of the ones that you use Loctite on. So I'm going to use the blue Loctite. So this is the removable one. I don't think I want the red Loctite on here. I guess if it comes a issue later on, I will put the red Loctite, but I'm just going to use blue so that it is still Loctite thread locker, but it's removable without having to add a lot of heat to it or anything like that. So that's going to be this little issue. You do have to have a relatively long Allen wrench for this, because this hole here is an access hole for that screw way back in there. So it is a little bit challenging to do that one. All the others are very straightforward. Again, don't lock any of them down until you've got all 4 of them in there, and then you can start to try and tighten things up. I'll put the Loctite on later. I'm not going to put it on just yet. So I will have to unassemble these at some point to get the Loctite in there. For now, we just pretend that I already did that. Because it is going to be an issue to disassemble this if I get too far in the assembly. Just getting to these screws will be an issue. I just don't have blue Loctite with me right now, so that will be later. All right, so they're all 4 there. And we can tighten them up. And then there's a lot of preloading that's going to have to do, preloading of the nuts for things that will attach later. And the instructions seem to be very good about pointing that out. I would, recommend reading, or at least, trying to go through all the instructions before you start this, because there are a lot of things that, like preloading the nuts or making sure that what parts go where. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes on. So what we need to do, let me get these back in their little bag before we lose some of them though. We need M3 nuts, and we're going to preload 1 on each end of our, oh wait, these are M3 screws, not M3 nuts. Here we go. We're going to load 1 on each end of our little carrier here. They'll end up attaching here and here. So it is going to be an issue to, get all this stuff sorted out straight. I also, at the same time, I need to load 6 of them back here. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge to keep all of these from falling out while I'm handling it, but we'll try. Three, 4, 5, and 6 there. There we go. And 2 on the bottom. So that's going to be really tricky because they're on the bottom down here, and I don't want to tilt everything and have stuff flying out everywhere. So I'm going to try and kind of hold it all steady while they're being loaded and keep this flat for the most part. All right, now I'm going to raise this up, and it's going to drop down into here, trapping all those nuts in various locations, and that actually fits really well. I will say that the parts, the way they're modeled, take into account the shrinkage of ABS and that sort of stuff very well, and everything is really tight, almost snap fit type things that are printed. So the STL files are really well done. Now I'm going to attach a lot of these. So I'm going to put screws here, M3 by 8s, I believe, here and here, and then on the bottom also. So remember we preloaded 2 there, and then 4 of these in the back that kind of off the camera or hidden anyway will screw in here, 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 and here, and then 2 will end up in the middle here. So we do have to make sure that we get those centered up the way they need to be. So I'm going to go do all of that, and then we'll work on trying to make sure that these 2 rails are parallel. We'll end up taking these off. They're just here to kind of create the frame temporarily, and then as we build the rest of the frame around here, they'll be moved actually kind of back here a little bit. But they're here kind of holding everything together temporarily. All right, we'll be back after I've tightened all of this stuff and we're ready for the next step. Okay, we got it to where this works the way we want it to. It was a little bit difficult. There are some issues, not issues with any of the parts or anything, just the way it's, there's a lot of little pieces here that have to get squared up. So I did a slight detour from what the instructions said, or at least what they implied by the order of the pictures, and I put these 4 screws in first, because otherwise, every time I moved everything, those 6 nuts that are back in that back rail back there, they would fall out here or maybe over here, and I'd have to start over. So I did those first. I actually did the end, the other end, and then use these, put these 2, making sure to keep 2 in the center here. I used a combination of like little motions like this to get everything lined up. Same thing on the bottom where I used this and a light to see down in there to get the nuts lined up. So it was fiddly, but we got it done. Getting this guy trammed up was not hard. It's just very small amounts of change make big differences type of work. So what I did is I got this rail lined up. You notice I've got a cutting mat here with a grid on it, so I kind of used that also to help get everything squared up. So I tried to get these two parallel to each other first of all, and then this perpendicular to these two rails, the top and bottom. Then I loosened this rail like here and here, and you have to take these guys off to loosen these, but I did take that off. But be careful, once you take these off, then this can slide all the way off of there. And I loosened slightly every one of the little screws holding the linear rail itself to the extrusion. And then I, would run this all the way down here, get these tight, these down here at the bottom tight, these, then run it up to the top, tighten these, run it back to the bottom, start lining up some of the little screws here, because once you loosen these screws, then these rails can kind of wiggle around a little bit. You do have these that help get them lined up, but I ended up having to kind of manually do it. Tighten these or snug them. I didn't tighten anything super tight. Snug these up with the carriage down at the bottom, run it to the top, snug these up here, and then you just kind of slide back and forth. It could be a little bit more smooth. I may lubricate it a little bit. It has no lubricant on it at all right now, but maybe add a little bit of lubricant just to keep it moving a little freely. It doesn't bind or anything, but it doesn't just like slide off the rail either. This is the Z-axis, so this will end up, this direction, and so it doesn't have a whole lot of, doesn't have to move fast or anything like that. So I'm not too worried about it, but it could be slightly better aligned. But I'm gonna call this good, and just recognize that this little step, getting all of these little guys in the little screws to line up with these nuts that are in the rail here, that's a little bit tricky to do. Not impossible. Get you some probes so that you can get in there and line things up just the way you need to, and it should work all right. It looks like the next step will be to actually remove these rails on the side and start building out the frame itself. And so I'll work on that a little bit, and then come back when I have something interesting to show you. I'm already recognizing that this step is going to require lots of preloading of M3 nuts. I think that's probably to hold the side panels on at the very end. So I do need, or not they are M3 nuts. So I do need to make sure that I do all that correctly. We're going to add the Y-axis, X and Y rails here in a minute. And soon we should have the skeleton frame of our printer done. Right now, according to the instructions, we are on step number, page number 31. The steps aren't really numbered. Page number 31 out of 160 pages or so. So we're making decent progress. We're about a fifth of the way done or whatever. And I haven't been working that long on it. And it hasn't been terribly tedious. This little step right here was a little bit tedious, but it's nothing that was overwhelming or anything. So we'll come back in a little bit and see if we can have most of this skeleton done. Okay, we're ready for the next step to start putting some of the frames together. I did notice that this step had the little end stops on the Y-axis that we built in like the very first step, and I had never put them on there, so I did put those on there. I guess I can take these little stoppers out of there so that we have this. I still have these stoppers in because there's nothing yet to prevent these carriages from flying off that end, and I don't want that. I have loaded 6 M3 nuts in this top rail, the bottom rail, and then one on the back of this that's like touching cutting mat there. So I've done that. Now we're going to carefully, without sliding any of our nuts out of there, stand it up. Let me lower that so it'll kind of sit there. We're going to take one of our y-axis rails, and it has a little access hole right here, and it looks like we could probably stand to back that out a little bit. Oh, I've also put M3 by 10 millimeter screws in the end of these y-axis. Could have done that later and it'd been fine, but this will work. And so we're going to attach this here once I can find the screw hole. There are several steps where it'd be nice to have somebody, holding some of these parts for you, but it's not always an option. There we go. All right, I'm not going to tighten anything super tight yet, and because we've got a whole frame of things to put together here, so we'll just kind of get it in place. These down here, the cameras, we're getting really close to the camera there. Down here, maybe I can move it up to get a little bit more room, or just the ease. These are, they have one access hole in one end right there, and that's gonna go in here. Actually, I think now that I'm looking at it, I might have to put a one of those M3 by 10 button head screws on the end of that. I can do that later though. So we're going to slide this guy on here and try to get the access hole and the screw lined up to where we can get that going. There we go. That's going to do something like that. And then we'll do the same thing to the other side, and I'll probably pause and come back once I've done that, because it's just the same thing that we did here, just do this other side over here. Okay, I've got both sides built. I went ahead and added the M3 by 10s to all of these corners. We're going to take those H extrusions, the ones that have the two holes, one here and one here. They're the access holes to get into these guys. They were the ones that we did have on the side. We're going to slide them on here to create the back of our printer and start to get a little bit of rigidity here in our frame. So we're beginning to close it in and get some stuff squared up. I'm not tightening any of this stuff down permanently yet, just because it's going to have to give a little bit and get squared up here later. The camera is kind of really close to where I'm working. Ow. So I mean, I can tell what I'm doing, but basically I'm just tightening up all of these. Let's see. There. And then see if we can get this one. Get it all sort of fit together so that we can start to see it look like a printer. And now these little carriages don't have any way to get out of there, so I can get rid of these stoppers. So we've got that lined up. Start to put this together. We're almost done with what I'm going to do for this video. This one I just kind of want to get the skeleton of everything put together, and then we'll see what's next. I guess I didn't get that one very tight, did I? Maybe we need to tighten up slightly more than that. It does look like the next few steps are preloading a lot of M3 nuts for the panels, so I'll come back after I've done that, and I think we're just going to put the front on here, maybe set some distances so that everything's kind of squared up, and we'll be complete with our frame at least, and be able to move on to some of the more interesting parts. Okay, we're at the final little bit here for the frame. I have put in this black panel. Now, the one that came with the Formbot kit does not have pre-drilled holes for mounting Raspberry Pi, the SKR, things like that. So that's a little bit of a, I guess it's good in the sense that I can do it the way I want it, but I'd kind of like to just do it standard. But it won't be a big deal to drill through. It's just acrylic, so it won't be a big deal to drill through. But it does, at least mine did not have pre-drilled holes in that piece. It just slides in there. It slides in the rails there. There's a lot of preloading, so make sure you get all the nuts loaded where they need to be. I think I've got that. Once I get it all assembled, we'll check again. This is a B rail. It has no holes in it, and you preload 4 nuts on the bottom of it, and it's going to sit right here. These are D rails. They have 2 holes, and then one side has 1 hole. So there's one there, and then one more there. So they have to go so that this one-sided hole will actually line up with the B rail, so I can screw into it. So we'll need to do something like that, and something like, it's kind of off the screen, but something like that. And now we tighten it all up, and we will have the frame ready for whatever's next for our little printer here. So this part, and I will need, before we go very far after this, I'm going to make another count of all the preloaded nuts, because I don't want to have to take it apart to load some nuts. Let's get this one tightened up that I forgot. So it even gives you a reminder in the manual of where all of the preloads should be. All right, so when we come back, we'll be on to whatever the next step is. I haven't looked that far ahead, or I don't remember what the next step is anyway. And we'll have our frame. I may not have mentioned this. I did attach the drag chain down here at the bottom. They mentioned maybe taking the most of the drag cable out of here and just leaving the end connectors. For now, I'll leave it. If it gets in the way, then I will take it apart. You can just snap these things apart at the little joints right up here. And if it gets in the way, I'll take that out later on. Right now, it's not in the way. So this will probably be the end for this video, and then I guess part 3 we'll do. Let's take a little view of some of the motion. So the stepper motors that are going to control the Core XY type motion looks like the next step. That'll be kind of fun to get that assembled and make it look a little bit more like an actual printer. So we'll see how that goes next time.